Liz Cheney, who has been keeping kind of a low profile, was out and about yesterday morning, and she had some interesting things to say. You were monitoring Liz Cheney yesterday. Where
Right.
where do we want to start with Liz?
Okay. I don't know what the correct order is because she's talking a
Yeah,
lot of policy, but
yeah.
the thing that struck me most was Liz Cheney not accidentally, as an aside, when she was on Face the Nation, speaking about the Republican Party and suddenly pausing to say, I don't know
Oh
if I
no.
really am a Republican anymore.
Yeah,
Did you catch?
can we play it? Let's play Liz, where she basically is like, and again, keeping in mind how many decades this woman has been a stalwart Republican up until recently, was number 3 in the Republican leadership in the House, and here she was yesterday morning.
We need a much louder voices within both parties. Within my own party, I don't even know if I should call it my own party. Within the Republican Party right now, the extent to which you're seeing people suggest that we should abandon Ukraine, which essentially is surrendering in this battle between freedom and tyranny, and that would be very dangerous for our security.
Yeah, I think she's realizing that something that a lot of us have realized at a certain point is that when you're in the wilderness this far, that maybe you're not going back home, that maybe you are a political orphan. She also had some things to say about the politics that's going on here. Let's talk about let's where she talks with Margaret Brennan about the threats, because this was also one of the big themes of last week, Will, was all of the threats, the intimidation, the bullying aimed at Republicans, which again is very much part of the MAGA playbook. The interesting thing about last week, though, was it didn't work. And that I think is significant. Now, how significant it is, I don't know. I'm not going to get into irrational exuberance here, but folks like Steve Bannon, had basically, let loose the kraken of people who were, inundating these congressmen and their wives with emails and voicemails and all of that bullshit. And because I think there was a critical mass, they basically said, "Yeah, we're not caving in." But this is Liz Cheney talking about those threats to the lawmakers.
What do you think is driving the domestic threats against lawmakers within the Republican Party and also among some Democrats?
The domestic threats are absolutely being driven by Donald Trump and unfortunately some of his supporters who, in fact, have encouraged and taken steps that have resulted in, as we saw on January 6th, political violence. When you have a member of Congress, reportedly like Warren Davidson from Ohio, who in the meeting with Jim Jordan last week, when some of the holdouts raised with Jordan the fact that they were getting death threats, one of them told me that in response, Congressman Davidson said, well, that's not Jim Jordan's fault. That's your fault for voting against him. That is the kind of encouragement and acceptance of violence that is absolutely has no place in this party, should have no place in our country. It is.
Okay, I think that's an important point, because if in fact you have members of Congress who basically look around and say, well, okay, you can't blame people for, the death threats. This is what you get for going against the Orange God King and against MAGA. I'm sorry to use the word again, but this does seem like a rather significant, indicator of the normalization of political violence.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a very serious topic.
It is.
We're seeing actual violence over in Israel and Gaza, but what we have in the United States, we like to think we're above political violence. We're not. We've had political violence before. But what we have now is when I wrote about Lindsey Graham, I called this a symbiotic relationship between the Republican Party and the political violence of the MAGA Donald Trump, extremists. The symbiotic relationship is that the politicians don't explicitly endorse the violence, but they use it. Right. And now in Lindsey Graham's case, it was right after January 6th. And he said, he said to the Democrats, don't impeach Trump, cancel your impeachment of Trump, because I'm afraid there will be more political violence. So we just had a mob attack the Capitol. And instead of saying, we're not going to accept the mob, we're going to do the right thing, regardless of what the mob wants, Graham says, yield to the mob. What Cheney's talking about here, what Warren Davidson allegedly said in this meeting, is more than yielding to the mob. It is using the mob.
Right.
Death threats against members who voted against Jordan. And Davidson is saying,
leverage, as January 6th was leverage. Yes.
Absolutely. He's saying it's your fault. And if you don't do what we want you to do, these people, I'm not saying I support them, but they're going to hurt you or threaten you. Right. So he's using that. And Charlie, let me just bring in one more example. Donald Trump on January 6th, when Kevin McCarthy is calling him and saying, please send people to help us. My office is overrun here. Trump says to him, according to McCarthy's account as relayed to Jamie Herrera Butler, he says, well, Kevin, I guess those people just care more about the stolen election than you do.
That's right.
Right? That's Trump explicitly using the violence.
No, exactly, and the fact that that Trump and people like Rudy Giuliani acting at his behest were still making phone calls 7:00 that night, trying to get senators to delay the certification. I mean, they saw this as a way of advancing their political agenda, and I think you have to be just incredibly naive or delusional not to see the connection here. Okay, so a little bit more Cheney. I want to hear some more Cheney here. So here's Liz Cheney on the importance of rejecting lies, which seems to be a theme these days.
And we ought to reject the kind of attacks that we're seeing, obviously launched by Donald Trump, but also the kind of lies coming out of Jim Jordan and some other House Republicans, the notion that the entire judiciary system or the FBI is weaponized against us. And I would urge that people think about, as we look at the threats globally, the notion that we've got Republicans saying we're going to defund the FBI, we're going to defund the Department of Justice. Jim Jordan wants to stop a number of the programs that have kept us safe since 9/11. That is very dangerous.
Okay, this seems to me to be an obvious issue. This seems to me to be an obvious vulnerability for the party of law and order, and it's interesting that she's highlighting this. You know, Jim Jordan comes within 20 votes of being elected speaker, having called for dismantling much of the nation's federal law enforcement apparatus.
Right. Well, to Jim Jordan and people like him, they just refer to this as the administrative state, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the Republicans have always been an anti-government party in their rhetoric. The problem is
anti-law and order.
Yeah, but who does law and order? The government does. Part of the government does. So when Jordan and others call for defunding the FBI, Liz Cheney is reminding people, because Liz Cheney, remember, is a national security conservative. She's a hawk, right? Yeah. And part of what she believes in is law enforcement and the military. And if you defund the FBI, a lot of what the FBI does is, you know, in counterintelligence work, that they do a lot of national security, anti-terrorism work. So here we have the United States facing a lot of foreign threats right now, and we're talking about Iran, we're talking about Hamas, we're talking about terrorists. For God's sake, half of the Republican rhetoric, Charlie, about the border is that terrorists are going to come over the border, right?
Right.
And meanwhile, you've got the House Republicans talking about defunding the FBI, which works on this stuff.
And shutting down the whole federal government, which would, of course, be part of the let's protect America and keep it working, right?
Right. Let's fund in the name of more funding for border security. Let's shut down the government that does the border security. It's completely insane. So Cheney, because she believes in this stuff, is kind of heightening the contradictions. She's pointing out that the Republican Party is undermining the causes of security it claims to believe in.
Okay, so she makes one other point here, and I want to get to her not closing the door and running for president, because what's that all about? But she's on with Jake Tapper yesterday and connects the dots between Donald Trump's loose lips with classified information and other world events. Let's listen to this point.
He reportedly shared Israeli intelligence with the Russians very early in his term.
We knew this.
He also, as we know now from the indictments that we've seen from Jack Smith, shared highly classified military documents, apparently relating to a military action potentially against Iran. He shared that with Mark Meadows' ghostwriters and political consultants, it seems, according to the indictments. So if you think about, not only is he out there advocating for complimenting America's adversaries and, in fact, terrorist organizations that slaughter innocents, he also seems to have shared very highly classified intelligence information, both ours and the Israelis, in fact, with adversaries. So I think it's simply the latest example of why Donald Trump is not fit to be president of the United States.
Now, I agree with everything you just said there, but I mean, there's a little bit of it is a little bit speculative, but this is an interesting point, that among the documents that he has allegedly been sharing were things like possible war plans against Iran at a time when Iran clearly is playing a malign role in the Middle East. What do you think? What do you make of this, Will?
Yeah, well, it's not just Iran, it's the Israel thing. She's pulling together current events, right, with Trump's behavior. And, Charlie, sometimes we ask ourselves, what would the Republican Party be saying if it still believed anything that it claimed to believe in? And the answer is, watch Liz Cheney, right? So here she's talking about,
yeah, that's right.
She's the one who stood still.
What would a rational Republican Party look like? Oh, wait.
and let me clarify, there are a lot of things I disagree with. Most things I disagree with Liz Cheney on, but at least she still believes what she used to believe. So she's talking about, a lot of people forgot this. 2017, May of 2017, right after Donald Trump has fired Jim Comey. He's got the Russian foreign, right, the day after. He's got the Russian foreign minister in the Oval Office, and he just spills to this guy, the Russian foreign minister, what is highly secret Israeli intelligence, right? And the people around Trump are appalled. They're just shocked that he did this, right? Because Donald Trump doesn't care about Israel, right? He talks about it. He's happy to betray them to his real friends, which is the Russian foreign minister. And then, as you point out, the Iran situation, where Trump is, to anyone who will listen, obviously taking out this document that is a war plan against Iran, just because he wants to hurt Mark Milley, who apparently wrote this thing. Charlie, we have no idea who else Trump shared this with, because obviously he's been telling this story about Milley and saying, hey, let me show you this thing. So he's with Iran, with Russia. He's betraying our chief ally, Israel. In addition to which, a couple of weeks ago, he insults Netanyahu and the Israeli foreign minister, or the Israeli defense minister, because Donald Trump doesn't care about any of this. And the Republican Party is talking about Israel and they're talking about Iran. Meanwhile, they're backing Donald Trump for president, who is undermining all of that.